Good evening and welcome to the Shelburne Planning Commission meeting of May 25th, 2017. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. I'll consider a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Kate, seconded by Dick. All in favor? Aye. Agenda is approved. Next item is approval of the minutes of May 11th, 2017, which are included in your packet. I will consider a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Dick, seconded by Jason. Any discussion? I had one typo on page 3, the paragraph right before 8, beginning and concluding. I think it should be adopting, not adapting. That's probably just a typo. Other than that, they looked good to me. Any other edits, comments, rephrasing?
Just on the first page on point 3, I didn't know if we needed to have vote counts, or if it mattered.
On,
Yeah, that was an issue on my part where I did not get I think I had intended to check the tape. Do people recall?
which was this? What was it?
This is on I think you're saying, Jason, on the first page of the May 11 minutes, down under approval of minutes. It doesn't
Right.
have the number of ayes and abstentions with the motion carrying.
I mean, ultimately, the motion carried, it was just, I circled.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Ann didn't vote, did she? I think Ann abstained.
Crap.
Yeah, I think that.
And one other person abstained because they weren't here.
You abstained too, I think. Those were the two abstentions.
And how many were present? How many of the board was present?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Never mind, I can get that, sorry. Okay. So it was Ann,
And Ann and Graham didn't vote. Is that right?
I think so.
Right. So can we direct staff to confirm the
Yes.
vote tally on that? If that's okay.
Yeah, that was an
With everybody.
oversight on my part.
Okay. All in favor is amended?
Aye.
Minutes of May 11th are approved. Moving on to the next item, which is disclosures relating to any potential conflicts of interest. With respect to any agenda items, anything to disclose? Seeing no hands, hearing no voices, we'll move on to the next item, which is open to the public. Opportunity for non-agenda related public comment. Seeing no bodies in the room other than our friends who will speak to an agenda item, we'll move on to item 6, which is our public hearing on 3 separate zoning-related bylaw amendments. The 3 under consideration, I will formally open the public hearing, and the 3 that we'll be discussing are an edit related to daycare facilities in the mixed-use district. The second item will be an addition of a market delicatessen use in the Shelburne Falls district. And the third will be an update to the integrated agriculture bylaw in the rural zoning district, and we'll take them in that order. So with that, the public hearing is formally opened, and I will turn it over to Dean to cue this up for the public, if you'd be so willing.
Sure. And I can adjust the lights if it's going to help. And cover all 3? One-
If you could, yeah,
Yes.
if you want to give I can do it too, if you want to give context on the request. This came in from Larry Williams, and we were responding to his desire to remove the
The size
limit.
limitation, yep. So as mentioned, there are, sorry? There are three separate proposed sets of changes. The first one having to do with childcare in the mixed-use district, and which, as Jamie has mentioned, came about as a result of a request from Larry Williams, who is involved with Redstone, which owns the former Jelly Mill Common, the Shelburne Commons, which is the site of a daycare center. And currently in the mixed-use zoning district, there is an allowed use for daycare centers or childcare centers, but there's a size restriction on that. Yeah. Okay. Normally it'll be good enough there, but and so because there is a size cap in that district, it serves as a limitation in an instance where a facility wants to grow beyond 75 children. And so Larry has come, the Planning Commission looked at different alternatives. There are other size limits in other districts. We consulted and put out the question through different places about where the possible origin of the size limit might be. Didn't really determine it. But in the end, the decision was to strike the words "with a maximum of 75 children" from the section of the zoning regulations, which is Article 10, where it's currently located. So as you can see on the screen, Section 1020.33, the listed use daycare centers would remain, but the words "with a maximum of 75 children" would come out. That would allow an existing facility that is contemplating going above that number to apply for an amendment to their approval.
Yeah, I mean, I would add it's important to keep in mind there's a state layer of regulation that we were all very comfortable with. I think as part of the request, Larry made a very compelling argument. I think the board agreed. There were a couple letters of support that were very persuasive from very well-respected organizations. So I think the decision from this end was relatively straightforward.
Yeah, that's true. There are long-established regulations at the state level for different these types of facilities. The zoning regulations are really looking at somewhat different issues as far as their operation and their impacts. But nonetheless, it's not an unregulated industry by any stretch of the imagination. But I think that points out one of the things that the planning commissioners considered, and that was whether or not the number wasn't redundant. Since these are conditional uses, and conditional use review allows the Development Review Board, or in fact requires the Development Review Board, if they're looking at an application, to consider things like traffic impacts, impacts on water services in the town, sewer services in the town. The kinds of things that a number is a surrogate for can already be addressed as part of conditional use review. So there was some redundancy there. Moving on, the second area, the background for this is that in the mid-2000s, both the town plan and the zoning regulations changed. And the result of that change was for what had been one relatively large zoning district covering the entire village to be broken up into sub-areas. And when the village was zoned in one uniform way, the area that we think of as Shelburne Falls allowed markets and retail uses like that. When it was divided into sub-districts or smaller districts, the lists of uses that were assigned to each of those changed what was allowed. So the upshot is that markets went from being a conforming use to a non-conforming use. There had been some discussion at one point about adding things in, and there was some pushback, so it was never the case that after the Shelburne Falls district was created, markets or markets with delis were a specifically authorized use. Move forward through time, what had been known as Galapagos Market went through a change of ownership, a couple of different iterations. It had operated as a market, and then it had stopped being operated as a market and was then used
following a zoning change or a permitting approval, it changed to professional offices, which is one of the uses that is specifically allowed in that district. One of the conventions of zoning is that when a property moves from a non-conforming status to a conforming status, it doesn't get to go back. Whether or not that's what people would like to see on a case-by-case basis, that's the general concept if you have conforming uses and non-conforming uses. The owner of the property and their realtor came to the town and asked what could be done about their situation because they are looking to be able to market it as a property that can be used as a market with delicatessen. The way that the Planning Commission and staff have developed it, or the response to that request is to reinsert a use that would fit that type of activity, and we're calling it market with delicatessen, but add that to the Shelburne Falls district. So what that looks like in terms of the regulations is that in Article 9, at the end of the list of conditional uses, we would insert a new use, 920.12, and that new use is called local market with delicatessen. So it would take that out of the status of being non-conforming and put it into the status of conforming uses. Along with that, there'd be a definition inserted that lines up with that use. Okay?
Can you go back up to that real quick?
Sure, and yeah.
Right there? Yeah.
This is the text that was circulated last time. So nothing has changed since 4 weeks ago, sorry.
Would you like to say anything as part of the hearing, or we'll give you an opportunity after the walkthrough here if you'd like as well. Just feel free to take the mic and state your name and.
Yeah. Okay. So continue. The third.
Okay. Go ahead.
The third area is a use called integrated agriculture, where some individuals have been in conversation with the town, or with the Planning Commission more specifically, for some number of months now. I detail some of the history in the memo that I prepared in a couple of different times. Integrated agriculture was a creation of the town of Shelburne to deal with a situation that is created because state law exempts certain activities from zoning review. And essentially, anything that qualifies as farming is not subject to review by zoning regulations. However, what does fall under zoning review is anything that doesn't qualify for that definition of farming. And what we have seen develop in the last decade is more and more establishments that cross over, or they'll do multiple uses, some of those that qualify for the exemption and some things that do not. And so when Shelburne Vineyard was first being contemplated, there was an application filed for that establishment and it was denied, and then the result was a zoning change. And the zoning changed in the way that people read it today, which is to have this hybrid land use added to the zoning regulations as a conditional use. And the core ideas are that it picks up right from where the exemption ends, and it allows someone to do farming and things closely related to farming, processing agricultural commodities and things like that, using commodities or crops that come from someplace else. It's the text that gets around what's called the 51% rule. If someone grows things on their property and processes it, it's a farm, but if they import the product in an amount that's greater than 50% of what they use, you could think of it, well, if someone imported 90% or 100% of their agricultural product and canned it, it would be food manufacturing. So what the integrated agriculture does first is it says to a farmer who wants to get started and who may need to get inputs, crops, product from another location, that they can do that. And it qualifies as integrated agriculture. And in fact, that was the case, that was the situation that Shelburne Vineyard was in, because they were producing wine and they were planting new grapevines, but those grapevines wouldn't start producing grapes for 3 years. So integrated agriculture picks up where the exemption leaves off by allowing farmers to bring in product from away. And then it goes beyond that to say that when people do that, if they're investing and they're growing, but they're also importing and processing and adding value, there are other related activities that also might occur. And so the other part of integrated agriculture is this notion that there are primary and secondary. And the secondary activities are things that are really not farming, but they are happening in association with the farm. So sales of non-farm products that are somehow related to what's grown, and hosting of events, those can be allowed. There is a somewhat controversial, I guess, section in the regulations that is under the heading revenue criteria. And really, it's a section of the regulations that has never been used, to my knowledge, but the purpose is to make sure that there is some kind of ruler or measuring stick that the town can, or that the town has, to make sure that there is not an imbalance between the primary activities and the secondary activities. Because if the secondary activities are no longer secondary and they become the bulk of what's going on, it's really no longer a farm. It's a retail establishment, or it's a wedding or events hosting venue, or so on. And so the idea of the revenue criteria is that it's a way to make sure that the balance is primary is indeed primary, secondary is indeed secondary. And so there are some proposed changes that I think clarify things in a couple of ways. One of those is to make sure that no one who is getting approval under this section of the regulations, if they happen to fail to meet the criteria due to a bad crop year or a couple of bad crop years, that the calculation of 1/3 versus 2/3 is really only relevant in 3 out of 5 years. So it gives them a cushion for 2 years where things might have gone awry due to weather or whatever. And I think that's probably all I will say. And there is also a slight amendment or addition to the definition of land development, which is primarily a statutory definition that we've made a couple of additions to in the Shelburne zoning regs over the years. I'm not sure that it's super necessary, but it was one of the things that responded to a comment made by the folks who had originally brought this to the town's attention, which is that how does someone know that?
Of a trigger,
Yeah.
so to speak. Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. That was great. Thank you, Dean. So let's see. Why don't we, as a board, go through each of the three? I think most of these are probably non-controversial, and we'll get to a point where we're ready to consider a motion. But any further conversation on the daycare bylaw? Any further conversation on the local market with delicatessen change? Everybody comfortable, have said their piece? Shoot.
What's the size of the store? Do you know?
The square footage,
Yeah,
it is approximately right around 2,000 square feet.
okay.
I think it was just under when I checked in the assessing, which is why the number 2,000 is used.
Very close to that, I think. It's
Right.
in that.
So there was no intention on the part of the proposer to tell them that they couldn't use the space.
Great. Would you like to speak to this while we're on topic before we?
I don't think.
You don't have to.
Yeah, I don't think. we
You're welcome
really
to.
have anything else though. As of right now, it's empty and it's not marketable
Right.
still, so we're in the same, sorry. As of right now, it's still empty. It's not rentable upstairs because we don't have an answer for a prospective tenant. can speak on, who's been over there to look. The tax appraiser came. He's gonna reassess it, and we're assuming it's gonna be about a 33 to 40% decrease in value. It was overassessed to begin with, but I think it was our fault for not checking up on it. And, I guess that's about it.
My biggest question is what's the next steps in the process?
Yeah, sure. Happy to speak to it. So assuming that the bylaw change is approved via a motion that will be made
Okay.
momentarily, this package will be forwarded to the select board
Yeah.
for consideration. They'll need to find a date where they accept it
Okay,
formally. That won't necessarily be when they have to warn their own public hearing.
okay.
So they'll accept it for consideration to warn a public hearing, at which point they'll find a date.
Yeah, most likely they would be accepting it 2 weeks, second, I'm just trying to do the dates in my head here. The second Tuesday in June is when they would accept it.
Right,
And then they would,
so-
from there, set a hearing date that would be, this, just as what we had said last time, it'll be early July, when they would vote on
Okay, you
it.
know the schedule better
Okay.
than I do, so that's,
So then it'd be that second.
That's the
Tuesday in
general
July
timeline.
that It'd be the public hearing and you get the final.
And they would
vote.
Correct.
they would enact it then.
at that
Okay.
point,
Perfect.
assuming they vote in favor of it.
Yeah, I don't think I have any additional questions.
Okay.
So I appreciate you guys,
You're
your
welcome.
time and asking us, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
I guess in terms of the farm part, there's not much, well, we're not there yet.
yeah, no, well, we're going to jump into that now, so integrated agriculture being the last one here. Definitely the one we spent the most time on as a commission, had some good conversations, and I think we've done a very good job responding to the requests and trying to accommodate some of the concerns. It's probably not, as many of these are, 100% perfect as far as what,
Thank you.
you're welcome. But I think we've done a pretty good job. I don't know if anybody wants to weigh in on some of the latest changes, since there was some indication that we may not be 100%.
I'm not gonna support this.
On board, okay.
I think it's less value to the rural district and the town. And it does answer maybe some questions for a few individuals, but in the long run, I think the rural district is hurt by this.
Is what?
I think it's detrimental to the rural district and what we've been trying to do. And I don't think that the existing ag laws really prohibit someone from being successful or doing what they're trying to do now. This worked for the winery. This regulation was set up, and it worked for the winery. So I don't know why it wouldn't work for other things.
I mean,
And I just don't like the idea of increasing the industrial farming, which is what I think this becomes, as opposed to agriculture being the primary function of a business.
but industrial farming can't be regulated locally anyway.
Well, maybe I'm using the wrong terminology, but I think it increases the desire to create more of a factory environment than an agriculture environment. And you're not using your own products. You're basically, I think it will evolve into a situation where most people will be buying more product than growing it. So my idea of what the integrated agriculture was supposed to do was to help farmers to market their products other than having to put it in a tank and haul it away. And that's what integrated agriculture, the one that's set up now, does.
I mean, the way I read this, we took a baby step. The only thing we changed that is substantive is this notion of you have a bad couple seasons. So we added this 3 out of 5 year type of safety net, let's say, that gives a little bit of flexibility for that startup operation, for that operation that happens to have a crop that's vulnerable to infestation, something. Beyond that, I mean, I think we clarified the trigger, which was already clear to me, but it can't hurt to make it more clear. Beyond that, I don't know if anybody thinks we've changed anything in
I
this
also think
bylaw, the way I read it.
well, I guess I just like the other piece much better than this one. I think
The
it-
percentages
I think it
haven't
answers-
changed. I'm not trying to convince you. I'm just making sure everybody understands what we changed, which is, in my mind, pretty minimal.
That, ultimately, that was a similar conclusion that I came to. I wrestled with this a fair bit, and I think a lot of it was that I wasn't really, I understood conceptually what we were trying to do, but it just didn't make sense to me. As I went through it more and looked at how we're breaking it down, the concerns that I think, Dick, I shared with you earlier, I did have concerns that you'd have somebody that would just be under the banner of farming, but doing a whole lot of other things. And based on the language here, I think that the foundation is still farming. This is just enabling accessory revenues to those businesses. It doesn't necessarily set up that factory cannery type scenario that at least I was primarily concerned with.
Yeah, and that scenario is already regulated at a state level, so,
Mhm.
and there's nothing we can do locally to address that
And that
because,
was another reason I didn't feel this was necessary,
Of the
because the
preemption.
state does allow
yeah.
agriculture a lot of leeway. Some of our regs don't apply to farms, and they're allowed to do things on farms.
So keep
that-
in mind, their request was to get rid of the entire bylaw, right, which I don't think you want to do.
Absolutely not. I
Right.
like the old bylaw. I think it's better. I even like
Right.
the economic safety valve. I think that was important. I remember the discussion, and it was well thought out, and I just think it's a good piece. It's better, I believe it to be better than what we have. It's-
Okay. Kate?
I think it makes the intent of the bylaw clearer for everyone, which I'm always in favor of. I found it to be very vague before. The language, such information as may reasonably be requested by the zoning administrator in order to determine revenue percentages in compliance with the conditions imposed by the Development Review Board seemed kind of vague to me. I would not want to be either, on either end of that, in the position of having to justify whatever that meant, or being the person who had to collect that information. So this, to me, seems like it just clarifies what the expectations are.
I agree. I mean, that was a concern about reaching into the operations financials or books that may be ambiguous a little bit, but I think with that deletion, we address that. It's literally just a certification of two percentages, if the zoning administrator were to ask for that, so.
Yeah, and the other thing that I was, found, reassuring was that this made sense to, two different farmers who were here and would have to live by this. I mean, they, in one case, they weren't crazy about it, but they said that would be something we could do. So it seemed realistic and.
Okay, so if there's no further discussion, we can move to consider motions. My only rethinking here is we bundled the motions together.
Well, I drafted them, but I thought I had made it clear that you can pull them out.
Okay.
So you
Why
had,
don't we do that, just
yeah,
given
I
some
think
of
it's
the
probably a good idea.
conversation, right?
Yeah, if you close the hearing, then I would entirely
Okay.
support you asking for a motion that deals with just each piece.
Okay. With that, we'll consider a motion. There's a page in here that has the scripted motions. We'll consider the first, a motion to close the public hearing. If anyone's willing to make that.
So moved.
So we need this piece read here just for
You
the
can-
record's sake? Okay,
Um,
so motions moved by Dick as reflected in
the memo.
the draft motion memo, seconded by Kate. All in favor? Aye. Okay, public hearing's formally closed. We'll take these one at a time here. So the next piece will be 3 separate motions to approve the zoning change proposal and the bylaw change report. I don't know if folks want to discuss the bylaw change report. It is part of the statutory requirement, essentially reflects how the changes are consistent or not with the town plan and other zoning and other land use goals of the town. Looked okay to me. The only change while I'm looking at it here that I possibly make is on page 3, first bullet on the daycare center, and support the economy by, it says facilitating a diverse workforce. I might be a little more straightforward and say by expanding jobs, by growing jobs, which I think is what we're doing with those two changes. I mean, all three of these, in my mind, are economic development driven. We're responding to 3 local business owners who have concerns, and we're putting our economic development hat on, and I think that's important to emphasize here. So I would like to see it say by expanding jobs or something along those lines.
Just to clarify what was intended, it was the idea that by having daycare services available in the town, you're making it possible for some traditionally underrepresented groups, let's say mothers who have young children, to be in the workforce. So it's contributing to a diverse workforce. And I agree with you. Furthermore, it is increasing jobs in the town by virtue of those who are employed in the industry. But the idea behind it, and what I was trying to spit out that I think was just burdened by some of the paraphrasing of the goal and objective language, is that it allows people to be in the workforce who might not otherwise be in it if they couldn't access care.
So strike my last comment. We'll keep it, but I would like to see us add and
Growing jobs.
growing jobs. If anyone has objections to that. Okay, so the bylaw change report reflects that one edit. Any other changes? Hearing none, we'll go back to our motions to approve each of the zoning changes. So the first motion will be to remove the size restriction on daycare centers. If someone wants to make that motion, that would be helpful.
Reading it and just.
Just read it, just A, just subsection
I might
A.
suggest the way to paraphrase it is that you move the zoning changes summarized as removal of size restriction on daycare centers located in the mixed-use district that was warned for public hearing on May 25th.
Right,
I'll
And-
set them up as 3 separate.
Yeah, and then you can deal with the report at the end.
yep. Good on that?
Yep.
Okay,
Although I'm not moving that a package of proposed changes. If we're doing it one at a time, it's just a
Right.
change.
yep. Proposed changes to the zoning bylaw.
I moved that a proposed change to the zoning bylaw, which may be summarized as follows: removal of size restriction on daycare centers located in the mixed-use zoning district, warned for public hearing on May 25th, as well as the bylaw change report prepared to accompany the proposed changes, be forwarded to the select board for its consideration and action.
Second?
You could
Okay
leave
with
it,
it,
you
yeah.
can leave it in and deal with it, the report this one time, or just make sure you don't do it again.
I was
Yeah.
going to repeat that part for all 3 of them.
Oh, sorry, your intent was to leave that out?
Well, or just to deal with the report as one thing, because if something doesn't move forward, you might want to end
Yeah.
up changing the report.
Ah,
So
So
you're going to have 3 motions plus 1 for the report.
Just withdraw the motion.
can I withdraw that?
Yeah.
Okay.
that part, yeah.
Can I just withdraw that part, or do I need to, okay.
I'll edit that out.
Okay, so motion's on the table. We need a second.
Second.
Moved by Jason, seconded by Kate. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, our daycare center bylaw change has been approved and warned. We'll consider the next motion, which will be relating to the local market with delicatessen.
All right. I move that a proposed change to the zoning bylaw, which may be summarized as follows: definition of a new use to be known as local market with delicatessen, and allowance of local market with delicatessen as a conditional use in the Shelburne Falls zoning district. Warned for public hearing on May 25th. Period.
Be forwarded.
Be forwarded to the select board for its consideration and
That's right.
action.
A second?
Moved by Jason, seconded by Kate. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Our third motion here is with respect to the integrated ag. That was unanimous.
I move that a proposed change to the zoning bylaw, which may be summarized as follows: modification of provisions relating to integrated agriculture, warned for public hearing on May 25th, be forwarded to the Select Board for its consideration and action.
Second?
Moved by Jason, seconded by Kate. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
I abstain.
One abstention,
No action,
so we don't have a,
so
Quorum.
it means nothing
Yeah.
happened. Just so Perry has some background on this, despite the fact that you are short by one member, the votes still have to be done by 4, because 4 is the quorum of a 7-person board. And so by
Okay.
abstention, 3 isn't 4.
so the motion
Fails.
fails. 3-1-1 for the record. The last motion we'll need is a motion to forward the bylaw change report, if you would be so kind, Jason,
Sure.
since you're on a roll here.
Do I start with the first part and then just add in that line?
We could just say, I move that the bylaw change report.
All right. I move that the bylaw change report prepared to accompany the
Yeah.
proposed changes be forwarded to the Select Board for its consideration and action.
Second?
Moved by Jason, seconded by Kate.
Might I interject that someone consider a friendly amendment that would direct staff to make the modifications that remove the references to the integrated agriculture, since that was not included?
So moved.
So moved to edit the integrated
Well,
ag.
yeah, as part of
related
that motion,
items
if
as
you could
part of
either
that.
edit it now, or you could direct me as part of the transferal, if you want to do it that way, or we could grind through it now.
I think we should just direct staff to edit the bylaw change report accordingly to delete the references
As a
to
friendly amendment
integrated
to the
ag
one on the floor.
as a friendly amendment to the motion that's on the table.
Makes sense.
Might not be following Robert's rules here, but we'll move by Jason, seconded by Kate. All in favor as amended? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. With that, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is a discussion, a continuation of our conversation regarding form-based zoning. The Route 7 Shelburne Road North Corridor. This is a follow-up to our community workshop that was held at the previous meeting with PlaceSense, Brandy Saxton's team, and there's a memo in the package that we'll walk through here. I think we had agreed what we needed to do as far as next steps was provide some more specific policy direction to Brandy and her team as part of this follow-up process. So I think the most logical way to tackle this may be to just work through these items on the memo. I don't know if you want to, if you have anything to add before we get into.
No.
You're good? Okay. Everybody comfortable with walking through it that way?
Just lost my copy
You need-
of the last. Maybe I have.
So the first item that PlaceSense would look to us for a bit more guidance is the conversation around parallel roads. I don't know if we want to put anything up on the screen or not, but we can talk through this. I think everybody's familiar with this issue. There are basically two parallel roads on the current regulating plan for the form-based code, one of which is on the south end of the FBC corridor, in the Webster Road area, the second of which is on the north side. And the north parallel road is the larger of the two. So the thinking here, and I think some of the feedback has been from the community, certainly doesn't seem to be a very favorable response to this concept. We've heard that in a number of meetings here. We've had some folks in. There's been one application under this that's been before the DRB, and there was certainly some objections to at least that southern parallel road that were heard. And I think we heard that from a number of residents who were also at the community workshop. So Place Sense has suggested that maybe we just do a 180 from our initial idea there and rethink this a little bit more along the lines of a low-impact recreation path as opposed to a road. So I'll open it up to any comment from staff here to orient us, and then we can just have a conversation about what do people think about that idea? Is that a good direction for us to go in? Do people feel strongly about keeping the roads?
So the map that's being projected is the regulating plan map, and the roads that are being referred to are designated on the map as this dashed blue line. I'm trying to highlight that area, if you can see the cursor. And as Jamie was saying, there are really two primary segments. There's a northern segment that would run essentially in the rear yards of the properties located on the east side in the northern part of the corridor, and then, whoops, sorry about that. The southern segment that was not as well received or not well received is shown down here, and I'm going to try to zoom in so that people can see them a little bit. The southern terminus of the southern segment is Webster Road. Why don't I use that? So yeah, this is Webster Road. This is the jug handle, and so this is the area, and this is the motel. So this is the area that is affected by the southern segment. And just so people can see it a little better. This is the northern segment. As I said, whoops. Starting at the South Burlington line, extending south. This is Northside Drive, the area just north of Executive Drive, where that would come in. Okay.
Okay. For the benefit of the commissioners who were not on the board at the time, the thinking, or at least the justification from us and our consultant, was this idea of a parallel road would help take some of the vehicular pressure off of Route 7 and make for just a, how would you say it, sort of a lower.
One of the challenges is that because the highway is divided, if you want to go from, it's easy to go from south to north, for instance, on the right-hand side if you're heading towards Burlington, but it's very difficult to go the other direction. You have to go on the other side of the highway, and it's just a pain, and it's a hardship for the people who live in the neighborhoods there. So we were looking for some way to facilitate that. They kind of wanted a kind of more local way to get around a little more easily, and also something that would provide a higher quality experience for the pedestrian and the cyclist than the current totally car-oriented, unappealing highway experience that is now on Route 7. So that was the genesis behind this idea of having this single-use road.
And maybe one other little bit of context, since we don't look at the illustrative plan very often, it's also in the regulations for the newest members especially, either here or watching on tape. As part of the development of the form-based zoning, there was the creation of a pretty detailed map that illustrates, that's why it's called what it is, a very different form of land development, more intensively developed form of land development, and that's where these roads fit in. So it wasn't as though people just said, plop down a road, it'll make things happen. It went beyond that. It came in conjunction with a much more detailed plan for many more buildings in a form that would not be allowed by the traditional zoning. I just want
Yeah.
people to remember, we still
We-
have the illustrative plan.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
and we talked about those two zones as nodes. We referred to nodes a lot during the process of developing this, and sort of these areas where there would just be this robust pedestrian, more lively street level living that would, be more connected. And I think what we didn't do a great job, at least on the north side and probably the south side, was, getting into the granular dimensional lot level piece of this, where as the consultant got in, and I think Dean had flagged this early on, but it's tight. We saw that, Brandy walked us through that at the last meeting. It's really tricky with the current state there, with the lots.
In terms of the road would just be on people's backyards. I mean, my biggest
Yeah.
concern is as soon as everybody starts realizing, oh, there's a cut through, because you're like, well, Route 7, the lights, backed up, you start having people flying through these residential neighborhoods. I
Right.
don't think that kind of enhances anybody's quality of life. By not having parallel roads put in on the north and south, are we preventing businesses from getting appropriate traffic? Are we preventing anybody that's living there from having access to Route 7? I understand the point that it's a pain to have to do a U-turn on Route 7, but I think for the residents, they would rather have everybody that has to do U-turns versus driving quickly through their back of their properties.
Well, this was really not envisioned so much as something that would be maybe as readily apparent to through traffic, but something that would be more local, really.
Yeah.
But if you
Almost
put-
like an alley,
If you have somebody that's traveling and they put in Waze, it's gonna reroute you. Or
Yeah, no, I mean,
Google
it's a good-
Maps,
it's
it'll
a fair
just,
point.
it always reroutes you, and
It's a fair
if
point.
if it's not bumper to bumper traffic where it's taking you an hour to get from Shelburne up, I just get concerned that we're putting roads in residential areas where bike path and walking paths could be much less of an impact.
Well, to circle back to, I have a number of reactions to this that are actually all kind of integrated, but just to speak to the.
parallel road?
Well, to all of these issues here, but since the discussion item right now is the parallel road, my strong recollection at that visioning meeting was what the neighbors wanted was to have high-quality bicycle and pedestrian connectivity. And I think there are a number of different ways to achieve that. And personally, since just in the brief period of time since we worked through this proposal and then approved it, there have been some tremendous changes in the retail landscape, which was a kind of part of the premise of this, that I just don't know if the foundation it continues to exist for some of what we imagined. And so, I've kind of recalibrating my own thinking about some of this and wanting everything about this to be a lot more flexible than maybe the regulations that we have so far come up with allow. And so that's where I'm really hoping that we can go. And for me, the most important thing is going to be this topic of previously developed sites, which I realize is not something that we're
Yeah.
working on tonight. So, but that's what I mean about how everything kind of integrates back into it. So I think that Brandy's raised some very good ideas about, could these things just be converted to like a really nice bike lane, bike path experience? I think that would be fine, and that would not necessarily preclude someone from having a little kind of micro business back there, which is one of the other things that we were thinking about. And then the other thing that I thought she had a great idea was to simply add the requirement that all of the parking lots have to be connected, and that would allow somebody to kind of sneak around. Right now, you could kind of go almost have informally have two-way traffic in a way that you don't have right now. They have that as a requirement in South Burlington. I think it has been for many years. And it does enable you to kind of scoot around. I mean, it's not, the most rational system in the world, but it's effective, if you need to get around, like from, I don't know.
You do it from Trader Joe's to Healthy Living, and then that blue development area, you can get around through.
You can do
through
that,
there.
and then you can also do it on the sort of like where Higher Ground is, and the Alpine Chop and Cheese
Silver
Traders
House,
and
Yeah.
et cetera. You can sort of sneak around through there. So it seems like a kind of logical first step that we don't have right now, and it might allow, my goal is given all the information that we're getting about retail, which seems to be in a kind of, where it's evolving in ways that I don't think anybody completely really understands. I think we probably have some business property owners and business investors who are understandably a little bit leery right now. So I don't want I'm hoping we can move these regulations in a way that doesn't give anybody reason to say, yeah, it's just a little too difficult to go to Shelburne. So I'm thinking finding a way to have a more flexible path to yes, but that also moves things in a way that's a little less car-oriented. And it seems like if we can connect up existing parking lots and ways of getting through, you might be able to find ways to reduce the overall amount of impervious surface, for starters, and it might make it a little easier to entice somebody to redevelop, especially some of these very small properties. And then one of the other things that I wanted to, and again, I'm sorry, this is sort of jumping ahead to what we're really not quite prepared to talk about, but I think it's germane, is thinking about kind of platting some of these existing sites so that maybe we could do that a little more aggressively in the regulations, so that a property owner would have maybe more tools to incentivize redevelopment. So like right now, we're sort of accepting that the property sizes are the way the property sizes are, and then they're going to be just redeveloped with something that's going to utilize that whole site. Well, what if you could, kind of plat them out, allow ways to subdivide within the sites in a more flexible way than you have now, to facilitate development. It just seems like, from what I've been reading, retail is it's getting smaller, the spaces are becoming more flexible, and that just might make us a little bit more appealing as a place to redevelop.
I'd like to write on a little bit of what Kate said about platting. Some of the sites are Shelburne Bay Plaza and the Route 7 Deli. Those are two I'm familiar with that I don't think you would want to put a bike path in the back. And another is Modern Design, that is designed to have trucks go in and loop around from the front. And the building is actually set up so they can loop and then back in. So you'd have and there may be a bigger space up on the hill to get by that. But if we platted all those sites ahead of time, we'd have an idea what we're working with as far as safety as well as getting connectivity.
So could we go back to parallel roads? I think what we should do is get a sense of, is there support for moving from this concept to more of a low-impact pedestrian bike path model? Even if you don't love the line, if you like the concept of the use going from a road to a lower impact rec path?
I think that's sort of what I was addressing, is that bike path, I'm in favor of it, but I don't know that some of those buildings.
You don't love the
Well, I don't know that it,
location, or at least the.
Well, on the southern end, it wouldn't be as much of an issue, but I
Right.
see what you're talking about towards the northern.
in Shelburne Bay, you have, all the deliveries are in the back, and then there's a ditch, and then there's the fence. There is no room there.
Yeah. So the southern end, I support removing that. I think someone said in the group, it's a road to nowhere, and I tend to agree. There's already bike path infrastructure planned. It's already exists in part of that from Farmstead. So I don't really see a need to develop that as a rec path necessarily. But I don't, if others like the idea of keeping it on the map as a lower impact use, then I wouldn't object. On the north end, I do like the idea of converting that into more of a bike path route, as well as trying to enhance as much parking linkage as we can.
Could we contemplate moving that more to the property lines, to the east, closer to the property lines?
Where are you talking about?
From,
Well, the area that we're talking about taking the road out entirely in the south end, if we move that closer to the property lines, then it gives more room for useful development and still allows it wouldn't be so,
Do you mean towards Webster Road?
no, I'm saying
Means
where the
more-
line is now for the road, if you moved
Further
it to the east, closer to the line, it would allow the development of the property to take place without maybe irritating the,
Yellow button. Yellow button.
right here, if this line were moved over to along the property line, it would be less problematic for people as they do decide to develop their lots.
I'd like to look at the existing overlay with the bike path infrastructure before.
I think one of the reasons for putting that there, as I recall, was there's some pretty big wetlands through there.
There is,
So
Base.
we'd have to kind of take some of that into
Want the toy?
account.
Yeah.
Has to do a raised boardwalk to avoid.
Yeah, a beautiful raised boardwalk. I mean, I love the idea of having some kind of a path trail system that connects all of this. I think it was Andrew who was talking about, just connecting up all of these cul-de-sac
Yeah, I agree.
neighborhoods.
I'd like to see that overlay that we had on the
Yeah.
map that night that showed the current.
Because
plan
I anticipate
for
that
the
we're gonna,
path.
a lot of people are not gonna wanna
Yeah.
have through traffic coming through their
It was the
neighborhoods.
stormwater, yeah,
Okay, so this is
yeah.
Yeah.
this one, and I can pack it up if you want.
It had if you look at the black lines, that's what we were looking at that evening, was
These lines here, the driveway.
it showed some of the current infrastructure that we were looking at.
Okay, 'cause it's labeled, I was not in that group, but
Yeah.
I understood this map to be the one that shows soils and soil infiltration. There is another map, so maybe it's this one. 50-foot right-of-way, future roads. I think it was-
Maybe that's it, yeah. Either way, I'd like to sync it up with the current path plan and make sure that it makes sense, but I would vote to remove the southern road as well as the northern road.
You want it?
I think that's it, right? Does that show? Yeah.
So it's showing the yellow, it's showing this. Those were the road corridors. But you're thinking something that showed
That was, no, something that showed the current path network on the,
that was here last.
yeah, I thought so. Maybe not. Maybe we just sketched it out and we're sort of guessing where the current path
But there is
map.
there's one of the versions of the path map that, it may have some extraneous things on it, but this is the map that did not go forward. And so you're looking for where the sidewalks are, and where the existing paths are, they're shown. So you've got the Webster Road path,
You've got the bike lanes and the sidewalk. So-
This is Farmstead, right? Yeah. This is the one.
Well, this is Boulder Hill, actually.
Oh, that's Boulder Hill.
This is Boulder
Oh,
Hill.
here's Farmstead.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's like this here, right, that's the path.
There is a path through there, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you do see that here.
And we can sync up there, and it was,
Yeah, I mean, I just think having kind of a more dense network would be wonderful of being able to get
That
around.
blue path used to connect. I got this thing.
yeah.
Right here, it used to connect through here,
Mm.
and the DRB in its wisdom didn't require the developer to
Okay.
leave a easement.
Now we have to
So
drive
I don't-
everywhere.
I would say we don't have to figure out the route on the fly here, but I think it's helpful if we get a sense of directionally, do we want to move away from the road to more of a path network approach? And if people like connectivity with parking, if so, then that would be good direction to give to Brandy, at least on this first parallel road item.
Based on the points that were brought up last time, I thought this was a good response, and I think the path instead of the road and having interconnected parking lots definitely addresses what Perry brought up. You don't want people using it as a separate throughway, but having interconnected parking lots does let people get from spot to spot without getting out on Route 7 again.
So
I
remove
think
the
we have
roads.
consensus on removing the roads, moving
And-
towards more of a path approach,
Yeah, I mean, I
and
think
then
in an age where it's,
emphasizing connectivity with parking.
where it's so
like it
easy to
is.
buy everything online, you don't want to provide, create any more obstacles for somebody to not get to a store, you know?
So the next one here is building materials. This has always been a somewhat contentious piece that we've struggled with as a commission. We heard a little bit from Brandy about here's some recommended primary, secondary, prohibited approach. A little hard to tell if people like that, if people didn't like that idea. At one point, we talked about, did we just develop a prohibited list? And that came up as some people actually like vinyl, and some developers think it's a good material to use for a number of reasons in this climate. So my thinking on this is that it's just not ready for prime time from a community perspective on trying to articulate what materials are appropriate, what are not appropriate. It just feels like more work is needed, in my opinion, on this item. So I would vote for
I'm curious,
abandoning ship on
Curious.
trying to progress that any further.
curious what the other, like South Burlington has done.
What does their form-based zoning say about materials? That's a good question, and off the top of my head, I'm not remembering. Maybe I can find it online if you, or do you want it distributed in the packet?
Be helpful to see. I'd be interested too. It's a good question. You know, just thinking about Kate's comment about flexibility, this is one where we're putting a barrier up, and it may not be a barrier that a lot of people agree with aesthetically or from a construction perspective, and it just feels like we're overreaching a little bit. We're just not ready. It might be in version 4.0. When we get there, it just doesn't feel.
Well, let's see, this is a place of business that we also want to make into a place that would be plausible for somebody to live also. It is a highway. You know, we have this kind of Wild West situation going on with retail in this country right now. And I think maybe it's a little too ambitious at this point to have a kind of building materials thing. I mean, what we're trying to do more than anything else is establish some kind of Shelburne identity on Route 7, where there is none right now. But it is a highway. It's always going to be a highway. We're trying to create a little bit better livability for the people who live in the surrounding neighborhoods. And we're trying I think also very importantly, to dissuade what has been happening, which is people abandon the existing developed properties and move on to the few remaining green fields and put up some kind of big car-oriented thing there. So we're trying to kind of incentivize the redevelopment of all of these existing sites and then sort of conserve the few remaining big greenfield properties that we have for something that could be of a higher quality than what we're likely to get today. Kind of conserve those for another purpose. And one of those things might be some stormwater function for that might be one of the things that those sites are asked to do. So, and that's actually where we're thinking about hoping housing goes. So I guess I would say that maybe it's too ambitious to specify building materials, and but could there be something, what do you guys think about like a threshold? If there's a really big project, maybe we want to have some oversight on that. And I'm not sure what that sort of cutoff size would be, but it might be interesting to get the input of somebody like Larry Williams on what would seem kind of reasonable. And then would that be something that maybe the design review folks have some kind of oversight over, so that it's not necessarily prescriptive in the regulations, but there's a group of, talented design people who, in the town, we have a number of them who could maybe weigh in a little bit, something that's gonna have enough impact to really change the character of that portion of the corridor.
I think
I don't know.
we did talk about design review, and the problem
We
there
did,
was
yeah.
the roadblock, that the timing. If we could somehow get design review to get started at the very beginning with the developer and not have to go to scheduled meetings and maybe have it ready in a
Yeah.
short time. But I wouldn't,
Well, the idea was to sort of accelerate the process, right? It was sort
Right.
of remove all these steps, and that feels like another step that a developer would have to look at and think about, oh boy, who's on this design review board?
and the select board kind
Right?
of
As much
canned
as
that.
I personally like the idea, I don't know if it's the best idea to get where we need to go. And materials just feels like a barrier that we're putting up that we're not even ready to articulate as a community, let alone,
I don't even know how important it is for the really small sites.
nor do I. I think you're right, it was a little overambitious. It's a good thing to think about as this evolves, but not right now. We need to,
Well, I think the general thing to keep in mind is, you hit on it, is we want to create a Shelburne identity through that corridor, because right now, there really isn't one. So how do we create that? Is it through infrastructure around buildings, like street lamps and sidewalks and certain trees and that sort of thing? Or is it through building materials, building styles, colors, that sort of thing? And from a developer standpoint, a developer wouldn't necessarily want to be constrained, but from a building that identity standpoint, large or small, if you had somebody put in a small hot pink thing that obviously stands out just blatantly, is that what you want or not? And the way to control that could be through building materials and colors. I agree, I think that's a tricky thing to try and control.
It becomes very restrictive, so the one place where I've seen it work very well is on Palm Beach Island, where they are very, very restrictive in terms of you have to, if you build a house, you have to go before an architectural, and you go through that, but for all the businesses, it's very specific on the signage, the colors, what you can do and what you can't do. And talking about kind of the image of the town that you're projecting when you're going down Route 7, outside of the signs changing from green to blue, I don't think people, as they're going down Route 7, think, well, I'm in Shelburne and now I'm in South Burlington. I like the idea of things that the town can control, like the trees that are planted or the landscaping, whereas trying to do anything with the building materials, et cetera, I mean, there's buildings sitting empty. We want to not have restrictions on, let's talk about that when all of the empty spaces that are run down are filled, and then say, okay, how can we make this aesthetically more pleasing to say this is an extension of the town of Shelburne?
You okay with that approach, pulling it?
For now, sure.
Okay.
I think we do need, I agree with Jason, you do need, we should set at least color parameters of some sort. But maybe we don't need to control materials.
So,
And I think Brandy mentioned like not having solid colors, not having more than 3 colors. And, maybe we should open up to her a little bit and see what she recommends.
Well, one of the things that we haven't seen also is the proposal on the public spaces
Right.
and public art and wayfinding. And that might be a way to get at some of this. So kind of have a little bit more focus on, the void rather than the building itself, because we just want to get those, as you say, we just want to get those buildings reused and hopefully rented out and in some way. It almost doesn't really matter initially how that happens, just that it does happen. I don't want to be, the town that has, what was the community that you mentioned, somewhere in Palm Beach?
Palm Beach.
Yeah, we're just
Well,
so.
smaller, Southampton is like that too.
Yeah.
There's an aesthetic when you're there, and it's very, very,
Or, Carmel or
you
someplace
know
like that.
when you're
yeah.
there, but at the same time, it's a very different environment.
Yeah, it's a little maybe
It's a
too
highway,
aspirational for
right?
us.
So are they asking us, they've got a recommendation.
Their recommendation is, I don't know what their recommendation is. They had talked about, here's what we're thinking, primary, secondary, they gave some materials that they put up on the screen. They gave some examples of, the aesthetic, whether it was, metallic type roofs or colors, as you mentioned. I guess what I'm saying, I don't want to spin any more wheels on this one, and I think we need to just park it. Some good work has been done on that, and it can always be picked up in the future, but for now, I just don't think we're ready to include it. It's a barrier in my mind to entry, and I want to try to remove more barriers, not add them.
Yeah.
So you're saying we'll put it in phase 3,
Saying when,
maybe?
What was
When
the
the
word you
next-
used? It's being paused for now, and it's not gonna move
Right.
forward as part of phase 2.
right, but we have the work that's been done, and it can always be picked up, and
It's a resource
it's
for.
good work. It's a good
the future
resource
effort.
for
Yeah.
future commissions to look at if they decide to go down that road. So number 3 here is, I hope, an easy one. The recommendation is to do some very targeted outreach to local developers to get their input specifically on the current draft, and I think that's a great idea. So I would say absolutely. I think we all have a short list of people who we think they should weigh in on this. So I would say yes, let's do that sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I think that it'll be another couple of weeks before you have that complete draft for them to look at, but I think that there could be a gap between someone's desire to look at it and then actually looking at it and getting all the way through. So personal relationships, I take Larry at his word, but he may lose some steam after he gets in it. And if people have relationships with people who own property in the corridor and you can get them to commit to you that they will look at it, I think that's going to increase our odds. I'd rather have one of you talking to a property owner than have, Brandy's nice, but she doesn't have the relationship with them that you do. If you can be the person, or if you're not comfortable with that, then at least give us the name of the people you really think will respond favorably to her. Because,
Yeah,
I think
I
your judgments about who the people to have look at it are probably going to be a little closer to target than hers. She may have some good ideas, but, so if the answer to 3 is yes, let's do it,
Who?
then feed me names and I can.
Yeah, I think a number of us would be comfortable approaching Brian and saying,
Brian Precor is kind of an
can you
obvious.
get eyes on this one? And
Yeah.
even if you're not reading it word for word, take out your red pen and just tell us what you don't like.
You know, what about thinking a little farther afield? I remember when we first started this back in 2010, we had a sort of little retreat, the Planning Commission and the Select Board, and there were a couple of developers who were there. Larry Williams was one of them, but there were a couple of other folks from kind of, you know, the greater Burlington area, who were just there to sort of give us their reactions and thoughts. And it was really very informative, and I'm kind of wondering if, and we do need to sort of advertise this thing a little bit, if that might not be a,
I mean, we could ask, here, another name that I'm happy to reach out to, John Pizzagalli, would be happy to look at this, I'm sure. If he can find some time to do it, I'm happy to do that outreach. You're right, you know, thinking a little bit outside of the town borders might be a good idea. I think, I don't know, even someone like Steele DeBrule, right? People that own property out there or are operating businesses that can sort of weigh in on, yeah, this is, you're thinking about this the right way, even if it's not reading the whole code.
right.
People that have lived here a while and can react and say,
Well, it's not, I mean, there's some fairly sophisticated stuff going on in, you know, just in Burlington. I mean, who's, we could find out who's doing some of that and ask them what they make of this. And, you know,
Does- My experience, and two things. One, there is another design review, or rather, form-based zoning application coming in, so there's that news. That's
where is
good.
that?
Caitlin didn't give me the specific address. She has a meeting with someone,
Okay.
but it's imminent,
Good.
so I'm told. But the other thing is that reading this is not everyone's cup of tea. So, even people who I'll say, if I said the name of this particular real estate firm, you'd go, oh, I know them. And even they didn't understand the form-based zoning. And so I think it's going to be interesting and good to hear from people like Steele DeBrule or John or someone. But if you know people who maybe kind of, they've got some background, I'm thinking of Jeff Hodgson.
Yeah.
right.
You know, he's on the
Definitely.
DRB,
Or
he's
Mark.
a landscape architect,
Yeah.
or someone like
Mark
that.
could look at it.
They got a vested interest
Right.
by virtue of living here and being on a board. It's just not going to be something that everyone will pick up and get.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to do meetings and help them get oriented, and I think the orientations help, but people who have some kind of professional relationship, they're going to have an advantage.
So let's do that. If anybody has ideas after the meeting over the next week or so, just funnel it up to Dean, and we can get a short list together and then just figure out who's got a good relationship and can put an ask out there.
Okay.
The last piece, since we're short on time here, we're not going to go into too much detail, but this is one of the big conundrums with the current code is how are existing sites redeveloped, how are density calculations made. I don't know if you want to add anything. It looks like there's been some good work done here that,
Yeah, there has. It's one of those things where it can be simple, or it can be complicated, and really, it just has to be clear. So
Right.
that someone who picks this up will understand how the rules will apply to them. I'm kind of agnostic as far as what the approach is that would be taken. So I don't really have any problems with what is being proposed or recommended, but it has to be clear. And we don't want to improvise, because that was one of the first things we realized when it was adopted. Oh boy, what are we going to do? And we reached out to other communities that have form-based zoning, and they themselves had developed protocols, but it wasn't explicit in the rules, and it's got to be explicit.
Yeah.
I don't want to be working off a
I would
protocol.
suggest that we approach it as a kind of kit of parts and come up with a bunch of different plating options, you know, that align with the kind of thing that we want to be moving towards. But we're very flexible. There's, you know, I think in this kind of an environment where the demand is really, it's ambiguous if it's even there. We have to be very flexible, and it's all about moving towards, I think, compliance. You know, whatever they can do reusing an existing place, okay, maybe we just make them have, put a front path in to connect to the sidewalk. They do that in South Burlington. That's a small thing that can happen, that can make a big difference.
Yeah.
And, connecting up the parking so that it can be shared. Some, again, thinking about the public space amenities that can happen, so that it's defined where we're headed, even if it doesn't happen immediately.
Just to maybe contradict what I just said, that I'm agnostic about it, the thing, and we've been talking about barriers earlier tonight, the thing that I am slightly concerned about with the first paragraph, the idea in it, is that there will be some developers who might say, well, this form-based zoning, it's got this great stuff, and I could do an additional building, and that's great, but to go through the process of replacing all of their old conditions, having to do that documentation to shift over to form-based zoning, some of them may just say, boy, it's too bad that there isn't a way to split it off, because it's really all about the development potential. It all comes down to, in my mind at least, someone has an existing site and they look at form-based zoning as a way, and they've got space, and they say form-based zoning would say, I don't need very much space to do that. How could I use form-based zoning to put that new form-based zoning thing in the available space? And it's a tough nut to crack, but what Randy is saying is that they would essentially convert their PUD approval into a form-based zoning approval. And the project will have to be big enough in the eyes of a Larry Williams, I think, to justify that effort. Or they're just going to say, wow, that's just a lot of work. If they've got 10 buildings already and they want to put in an 11th, are they going to go to all the trouble of converting it? That's the fear I have, is that if there was a way the density could be broken out and assigned to a specific place and not necessarily.
This is what I mean about the platting. If we can, just throw out the PUD. It's a dumb suburban construct in the first place. So just chuck it out and plat, like how we would really like this to be if we were, building before they did before the Second World War, or at least before the early 60s, when they ruined everything with this auto orientation. They platted things out. You can, just look at Google Maps. You start to see, you look at Burlington or the village of Shelburne, and you start to see the further out you get, the chaos begins, So just.
So, but would the town be, and I fully get what you're saying,
Yeah.
Kate.
I don't know how
as-
the mechanism for this.
As far as your desire, what I'm understanding is your desire, but what I think you may be underestimating is the complexity.
Lots of things.
And there's, we may not
The
like
law.
PUDs today, but they have a legal implication. And so, if the town is prepared to say everybody resets to 0, then we could make it very simple.
That would be chaos.
But then, who would be platting? Is it going to be the developer that plats it, or is the town going to be
I
platting
would
it?
say the town is doing it.
And that assumes a level of judgment and wisdom that,
I'll do it for you.
yeah. So anyway, there's that. I don't
So,
want to slow things down.
so what would be the benefit of this, and why I think there's some merit in thinking more about this, as crazy as it seems, and finding a way to pursue it, is that we're incentivizing the incremental, organic approach that I think has a hope of happening. And we're getting in small developers, not the Pizzagallis and the Larry Williams, but, somebody who might normally be looking for a place where they could rent, but, might be interested in actually redeveloping something. Maybe got a millennial, and who's kind of thinks it's pretty cool to maybe go live up top, and then they've got, there's a lot of really interesting stuff that's going on elsewhere, and not necessarily in these kinds of environments, which is why I think we're at this really interesting point where the corridor is not gigantic. It's not a huge disaster area like so many places have. You know, I think we do have the opportunity to make some real inroads if we focus on where those nodes are, you know, the nodes of health. Shelburne Bay is the healthiest one in the whole place, I think. You know, if we focus on what can we do to make that place even better than it is, and then there'll be this kind of incremental, almost kind of contamination, but I mean that in a positive sense, of the surrounding properties.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I think this proposal may be viewed as, so we're just taking current state from the old code and trying to convert it into form-based and pull over the same conditions. It may be a similar barrier to entry for future development, so I tend to agree with Kate. I don't know enough about what that would look like to
Yeah, we
provide
haven't seen the
intelligent
tables, we
input.
haven't
It
seen the
sounds like
figures, so we
it
can't
might
know.
be an interesting idea. I don't know at this juncture in the engagement. Is it too late to put that ask to Brandy? Is it something that,
I think it's real opportune to do it. What if we had, so right now we're kind of talking about, maybe we need to think more ambitiously and have this sort of like the nuclear option that would be a developer could pursue. It's not going to appeal to everybody, but there is this other way that you can do it, and you know, but we're going to break it down. We're going to chuck out all the PUD nonsense from before, and we're going to break it down, and we're going to do it this way, and that's the way you have to do it. You know, like, so there's the
and when you say this way, that's a new site, in other words, like
Yeah,
this is a greenfield.
No, that would
No.
be a redevelopment, but like, what do you do in a case, you're thinking of something like rice lumber or something like that, right? The size of, what the PUD, what's the example in real life that you're thinking of?
As a real-life example
Of something that would be challenging, like the jelly mill, for example?
well, I think the
or-
Jelly Mill
Yeah,
is,
okay.
yeah, I mean, since we've been talking about it.
Yeah,
But when you say replat it, you mean,
Well, I'm not a
Clean site.
as big a fan of replatting as Kate is, so
Yeah.
I guess I would say.
but just so we understand what that means.
Well, you've shared some articles that I think some of your inspiration is coming from that, where you can set up a form-based zoning where you have the allowances for a certain layout and type and number of lots that have a really limited level of review, that a person can say, you know, as long, or they can understand that as long as I'm doing lots of these basic type with this this number within a certain area, I can just go ahead and lay them out. It'll just be essentially automatic. And then depending on the scale and or the intensity, then there would be an increased level of review. That's, you know, that assumes we would have the desire and that the environment would allow a pretty regular pattern of lots, which is, you know, part of the reason why they are the way they are is that the ground isn't flat and smooth.
Yeah.
And-
I just think otherwise it just might be just too much to expect that these places are really going to transform in the ways that we hope they will. I'll try to be more clear about what I mean. I mean, it's kind of,
But we're saying we script it out, right? Here, we're gonna give a prepackaged design that,
Are we saying that?
I'm
or-
not sure what we're saying with the plat. That's why I wanna make sure I understand.
Yeah,
Are
it
we
is. Well, it
saying
would be-
that this is a
It would be a
designed-
it would be like a formula, you know,
Yeah.
if you adhere to the formula, then you can develop, and it would be simple. maybe another way of thinking of it, it's not exactly the same, but the community in New York that we reached out to, near Glens Falls, I think, that has form-based zoning, manages redevelopment by telling the developer, if you have a Shelburne Commons and you've got a lot of space, all that they ask them to do is come up with the conceptual plan that is a form-based zoning plan for the entire property and put the required level of detail in the place that you want to develop. So it's kind of like this uneven form-based zoning development plan. And that's what the boards see and that's what they approve. And they basically say, okay, you've shown us that you've got a concept for the entire property that would work with form-based zoning and that you're not exceeding the form-based zoning development allowance. So you can go ahead, and if you want to redevelop the rest of your site, you can. You'll just come in with refinements to this conceptual part. So that's kind of like platting. It's just that the developer is the one who's saying what their ideas are for the entire site in a conceptual way. But what they really want to do is develop the one piece of it that they have highly refined. Now, I think if we're meshing this idea closer with platting, we'd be saying that we have an idea for what the layout of the lots should be. It's kind of maybe taking inspiration from the illustrative plan for what should the structure of the use of the land be like? I just don't know that we would be able to say that.
And that would be a good way to, a good place to start, since that was, came out of a public visioning.
You mean the place to start would be the illustrative plan, or?
I would think that would be a very legitimate place to start with some
Yeah.
of this, because that's what came out of the,
Although, the illustrative plan has things like the road being justified in part on the south end.
This is what we're talking about.
Because, that road was gonna serve all this additional housing. So in
Yeah.
a sense, it platted out as that.
well, but if we start with, okay, so that's been since proven to be something that nobody wanted, and turns out that those people didn't come and participate and so on.
Right.
But at the Jelly Mill, which, that's a different story, I mean, maybe we can kind of do this strategically. Not necessarily for the whole thing, but this is where, what I'm trying to understand. There's some areas that seem like they need a little bit more hands-on intervention, where platting might make some sense, and then there are other places where it's just, you just want to entice somebody to come in and fix the place up, they're.
So we have to identify where those key strategic nodes are, maybe?
Right,
And then
yeah.
figure out, what does the schematic design look like, right? What does the plat look like? I'm for that. I'm sensitive to time here because I want to make sure we have enough time for the town plan conversation and not be exhausted. But at the same time, I want to make sure we're giving sufficient direction to Brandy so that she can progress the draft appropriately. I think we're clear on numbers 1 through 3. Item 4, I like this idea. I just don't know if there's enough to.
You need to see the tables
We
and
need
you
to
need to see
learn,
the figures.
we need to learn more, I think, before we can spend more time.
Do we have a mechanism today for a developer to come in and say, hey, here's this area, here's my vision, what do you think, can we talk about this? Or is it, do we take the approach where you can only approach the town if you have a plan that fits the rules that the town has already established?
You mean in terms
Under
of form-based
form-based code,
zoning?
or?
Yeah, well, form-based zoning enables a bit more flexibility there. So I think that does open up the opportunity for a developer to say, here's the vision that I have. Do we allow that kind of creativity?
Well, it's all very new, so we haven't gone through more than one application. We've gone through only one.
And I guess that's where I'm going in terms of just language and feedback to Brandy. If there's form-based zoning sets out, here's what we think things should look like, and here are some rules, and this is what form-based zoning is. But to make things more approachable, I mean, with what you're getting at, with how do we redevelop infill and that kind of stuff, how about a policy, or not a policy, but a mechanism for a developer to come in and say, here's a thought that I have. Can we talk about it? Or do developers feel like they're going to get immediately shot down because Shelburne has a certain
No, I think they can
personality?
do that. They can come in and say, here's what I'm thinking for this site.
But they won't know what the
They won't
DRB
know.
thinks until the DRB.
Right.
So are you thinking come into the DRB, or come in to talk to staff, or talk to?
I'm just trying to work
think
with
it
the
was
theme of
more-
how do we streamline things and simplify the process. And
So I mean, from my perspective, and Kate or others may disagree, you know, form-based zoning is built, at least in part, on this premise that things will go faster because we say what we want. We know what we want, and we say what we want. And you say less about, don't do this, but you say, this is what we want. And we say it clearly enough so that they pick up the regulations, they know what we want, and they come in and they propose it. And then it's fast. And what our conversation right now is showing us is that when it comes to some things, we're still not able to put into words
What we want to say.
want.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's certainly possible. I think that if the developer got into a review process with the DRB, they would, you know, they would be as open-minded as they can.
yeah, well, I guess it gets back to just getting feedback on the draft from some key players.
I think
to
so.
See.
So we didn't talk about stormwater. I don't know if she was looking for additional direction. The takeaway was that there's some good soils, there's some not good soils.
Yeah.
Do we want to try to develop
Right.
incentives for development on the good soils to use green infrastructure, to GIS, right? Green,
GSI,
GSI.
yeah.
Yeah, I have to say, I think this is where the utility, if we can get a stormwater utility, this
This will help
will really
come
help.
together.
Yeah, because that'll allow us to, I mean, it sounds like just the hydrology of the corridor is telling us we need to take a watershed approach to this, that we really kind of are gonna be very limited in how effective we can be by taking a site-by-site approach. You know, so some of the places that might have the best stormwater capacity might also be exactly where we want to encourage the most dense development, you know? So it seems like if you have a stormwater utility, you can create a system where people who choose to use their property for that can kind of at least get paid for it, and that might free up other places for the density. The whole idea for me is to not continue this auto-oriented sprawl indefinitely into our green areas, and to incentivize reuse of existing properties, which are, you know, creating the problems of blight and disinvestment that kind of contaminate the rest of the corridor. So anyway, I think, and again, the utility, that's a select board thing, but maybe we need to have some kind of meeting about like where they are with that.
Yeah, I think.
Do you have an?
I think what, the fact that there was, you know, so little in this was that she was seeing or reading the tea leaves as saying, there's buy-in for this idea of flipping, making the green the default, and making people have to seek a waiver if they don't want to do the default.
Right.
And she also saw the value in creating incentives for people who can work together to
more.
develop, you know, partnered systems.
Yeah.
I think once you get beyond a kind of side-by-side lot situation, it's out of the realm of form-based zoning. I mean, I think it's helpful to know where those locations are, and if we have a map, or the DRB has a map, it's
I agree.
something that two property owners can work on. But if we're talking about something, the utility will, as Kate says, it'll create that opportunity, but it's beyond the form-based zoning.
Yeah.
Now, as the commission, separate from form-based zoning, you might want to be talking to the
I
town
agree.
manager.
That was my reaction too. I thought that's a nice reference piece that could be used for the roadshow, right? Like, there may be some developers that really love green stormwater infrastructure, and that's part of their
It's gonna pull them
selling
in.
proposition. So they may look at that and say, okay, these are the properties I need to focus on
Yeah,
as far as people to talk to.
yeah. I mean, the other
That may
thing.
be all you need to do, right, with that piece, and if we can just flip the default.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that map says to me is that one part of the corridor where some of the best infiltrating soils is up in the north, where it happens to be already developed,
Right.
but it also happens to have the greatest impervious surface level, and that's where you want to make an impact. That's
Mhm.
where you want the impervious surface to be removed so that you can have infiltration, and it's a place to focus. That's one of the things that map
Right.
tells me.
Well, maybe we look at that as a kind of, we use the node-based approach, but instead of thinking of it as necessarily character districts, it's almost like infiltration opportunity districts or something like that, or that's some kind of correlated with it. Because that would be a place where, and this would also be a great way to sort of signal Shelburne identity, if you could go with smaller footprints, which is what Dick has been talking about, and then higher buildings there. Because that also is, there's some, a couple of spots up in there where they have amazing views of the lake, if you could just get up higher enough. And that could be kind of a really interesting, depending on how it's done, fun way to sort of signal you've arrived at Shelburne, you know?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the Norwich students who studied Shelburne Road, that was one of the things
Yeah.
that they hit on. No one else before or since really has been hitting on that, getting up higher and seeing
Yeah.
the lake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They did.
Are there restrictions on building height on Route 7 in
Yeah.
Shelburne? So,
Yeah.
so if
Under
somebody wanted
under
to.
both the current old code and the current form-based code.
Yes, there are
There
height
are,
restrictions in both. So if there was a decision made to focus on going up, then those would have to be revisited, and they have to
Yeah.
get meshed with the fire protection and all those things. And
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's one for the next iteration.
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea, right? Like, that is an opportunity, but it's probably not one we have time to really dive deeper into
not as part
for
of
this
phase two.
go-around as part of this engagement. So the next meeting with PlaySense is June,
22nd
our
is
next
what,
meeting.
didn't I email
Sorry,
you
it
the
is-
22nd?
Oh, it's the June 22nd, so the second meeting in June.
I think that's the one that I
Okay.
emailed out. I may have printed it out.
Okay,
Second meeting in June is when I think she said she would be coming back for the
updated
so-called follow-up
draft.
meeting.
Okay,
That
that'll be
was-
an updated draft, I assume, of
Um,
the code or
Well,
something
what I
different?
understand is a couple of things. One is that she had said when she was here 2 weeks ago that she would have this complete, full, everything in it revised draft in a month.
Okay.
So another 2 weeks,
Okay.
we would have that, if she sticks to that original plan. Then the other thing is that she's committed to is a follow-up meeting and then a final meeting. And maybe I should just pull it up and I'm getting two dates confused. But then we did discuss, she and I earlier today, scheduling that so that it would be setting in motion. So you'll have this follow-up meeting with her. It'll happen either you've just received the full draft or you've had it for a couple of weeks. And then you'll have one more meeting with her.
Okay,
And that one would probably be, mid to late July, or maybe early August even.
sounds good. With that, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is comprehensive plan update.
Jamie, what did you guys decide on the previously developed sites? No action in this iteration?
We decided,
It's gotta be part of it.
yeah, it's going to be part of it. I think the ask was, how can we try to incorporate some of these ideas of plating? Is that something that requires more study? And to get Brandy's reaction to, what if we were to, identify 3 or 4 key strategic areas and pre-program it, develop a schematic for those areas? Is that something that we could layer in, or is it something we should just push pause on?
Stormwater was for the next iteration, right?
No, stormwater will be incorporated in this version. I think we're going to flip. So
Flip the defaults and
flip
then
the
have
defaults.
incentives.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was covered in an earlier thing.
Right,
she
we
had.
didn't spend too much time on that. So moving to the comprehensive plan update, we have a couple issues to tackle here, and I want to make sure we use our time most effectively here since we're a little behind schedule. The first item we wanted to talk about was walking through the future land use section. Dean has included in the packet an annotated version that I found helpful to help us focus on our review and update here as our first section that we're jumping into formally, I think, as far as the formal update goes. Dean, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. I thought we could, we can definitely do a page-by-page turn here and get initial reactions to some of the call-outs.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I'm happy to try to give a brief setup in terms of context. But I'm hoping everybody had a chance to at least get your heads wrapped around it. And there are full copies of both volumes at your places, so that hopefully you'll have those to continue to mark up as we go through this. My hope, and when I made these annotations, was really to just get the pot stirred. I'm thinking that the commission has kind of evolved away from the idea of a substantial reformatting and is looking at, let's look at the existing text and remove things that are out of date, or just no longer fit or have been accomplished, and then start tracking the edits.
Sound good to everybody?
Works for me.
Yeah, I
Yep.
think that seems like the best approach for us at this point. Dean, do you want to set up any of the
So
context here with the comments? Do you want to walk us through, or do you want me to?
I can do either. One of the things I would say is that I'm not in this set of edits or annotations saying anything about the revising the map format or the land use format, but that is a very important question that the Planning Commission will need to talk about at some point, and whether or not you're going to have the status quo or try to accomplish something more with the maps. But the text obviously flows from that. And so just jumping in on the page that has the header of land use in Shelburne, I thought it was worth to mention in that very first paragraph, this is getting somewhat tied into this issue of the vision, but the words overriding intention, I thought that was kind of an interesting way, or I'd forgotten that we said that, but it's an interesting way of saying what it is that the town wants in terms of the future land use pattern. And it uses words that are really similar to what we find in statute that have to do with the statewide planning goal of compact village centers surrounded by open countryside. That's very much evoked in this first paragraph. But that's what the overriding intention is expressed in the plan. If that's no longer the overriding intention, then you should change that paragraph. And then beyond that, the three areas are what we've called the growth area 1, or the village center, the area beyond the village that's still within the sewer service area, and then the area beyond that. It's really important for people to remember or to be told that this concept of, and where the boundaries are, it's all a function of the sewer service area. There was a big effort made now going on close to 20 years ago to set the boundaries, and so that's what's setting the boundaries of the growth area sewer service. Reactions, do you want to mark things up or just take feedback?
I like this section.
You can see it graphically illustrated in the map 1. Going to the page beyond that, the growth area, the plan does spell out what goals are intended to mean, what objectives. We use a goal, objective, recommended action structure. There are a lot of objectives and there are a lot of recommended actions. So one of the things that may happen as you go through this is singling out the 2 or 3 most important ones. I don't know that you'd cut down on the number of goals, but I do think you could cut down on the number of objectives or particularly recommended actions, because the recommended actions really probably belong in a separate document. And I was saying earlier tonight this idea of the village being broken up into 5 areas. It used to be just one, and so those are the village center. Those are spelled out at the bottom of what's labeled as page 7. Graphically represented.
Yeah, I mean, as I went through this, I was thinking we should just compress. The goals and objectives, to me, start to blur.
Well, when I think of goals, I think of things that are hard to achieve but attainable and specific. Some of this is very flowery language that is like overarching ideals. Like a goal is, we don't want any open shops in the village. That's our 5-year plan, to make sure that there's 100% occupancy for all of the shop space. Goals are specific. So I agree things got very blurred, but as I was reading through all these different segments, I kept going back and forth and said, well, was this achieved? Was this not achieved? And I also think for residents of the town, you can send out a 1-pager and say, here's a 250-page town plan document, but here are the 12 goals that we're trying to achieve over the next 5 years.
Yeah. So did you find the objectives were a little more specific and,
Well, we keep using the word encourage. How are we encouraging? So, where was I?
Page 9. objectives.
Yeah, so on the bottom, we say encourage, and I just wrote, how is the PC done this since the last plan update?
So maybe just a little bit of clarification or explication. The terminology often gets in the way. People with different training and different background often get into these wrangles, and it's unfortunate, but sometimes groups just have to work through the respective terminologies, and so that could happen here. The thing to understand about the plan is that it's prepared because of certain state law, and this is the future land use section, and so in answer to your question, how does the town encourage? The product of the future land use section is the future land use map. So one way to answer your question is, it encourages it by the shape of the areas on the map, and then when you implement it through zoning, by what uses are allowed. So you wouldn't be encouraging a variety of appropriately scaled commercial businesses, et cetera, in the village, if all you allowed in the village was, athletic clubs. So part of the answer is, it's in what you put in the zoning, or what you say, what the plan says should be in zoning. But encourage gets used a lot because plans are generally thought of as non-regulatory.
The way that I look at it as well is when we get into bylaw discussions, you can go back to the town plan and say, well, what was the intention? Like, what does our town plan say? And if it says, well, to encourage this, then that could guide the language of the bylaw that you're trying to talk through.
yep, and you see that in a bylaw change report, right? That's sort of the
Right, to be
concrete
able to
example
represent.
of, oh yeah, this all ties back to the town plan goal, and here it is. So how do people feel about this format, though? Do you like goal, objective, recommendation? Do you want to stick with that? Do you want to consolidate it, or?
Just in reading through some of these, I think there are some that can come out. I kind of waffle on whether or not recommended actions stay in or get put into an appendix. If they went into an appendix, then it's something that could be viewed as like referenced as far as a work plan or that sort of thing. My biggest comment on this section right here is that the order in which we're talking about the sections of the town are in a different order than it's on the map. Maybe that's my own OCD.
Say that one again?
Yeah, sorry, I missed that. The order that they're listed is not in the order.
Yeah, like if you have village center, institutional museum, and then village residential, but you look at the map and it's not in that same order.
Yeah, not in the same order in the key.
But
Oh, I see.
as far as this particular page, the last bit of the goal, I was finding it hard to follow. Supporting government offices that is lasting and does not limit future opportunities.
Yeah.
I started just getting lost in it, and that gets back to the point of having a specific goal.
I think we can just kind of, make this all a little bit pithier. That might be a way to start, and then we can start to see some things that seem redundant. Like, one of the things I was noticing is, it says Shelburne Village is the social and functional center of the town. And then in the goal, it says, ensure that Shelburne Village Center continues to function as a center of economic, blah, blah, blah. So it just seems kind of, undermining right after what we've just said.
I think that was an edit that was done in the last one or two cycles because of concern about giving too much primacy over Route 7 North.
Oh,
I think it used to say but
well, but it would seem that the vision or the introduction makes it clear that the village is kind of the heart and soul of the town, and everything radiates out from that, so, I don't know.
When do we stop our focus on growth as much as maybe the preservation of the village? I'm not saying it's fully developed now, but it's pretty fully developed. So when does sustainability start coming into play?
And when you say sustainability, Dick, just so I'm clear, are you thinking in terms of, well, there's a number of population that the town couldn't go beyond because it would be unsustainable?
No, not so much that, but there are developments that are fully developed, they've been there for 20, 30 years. And for us just to rezone them to increase density may not be the smart thing to do. Those are all, for the most part, are neighborhoods that are very, very, very functional, and I think meet the term sustainable, because you never see vacant houses, almost never. It's an area that's in high demand. It's sort of affordable compared to the rest of Chittenden County. So do we want to change densities in areas like that, and then perhaps change the whole picture of what that development is? Do we go to apartments in every other house, and then people all of a sudden don't want to live in that kind of neighborhood?
Where are you seeing the language in the plan that's saying the
Well, I'm not.
redevelopment?
I'm just saying that, we talk about growth a lot. Our emphasis is on our growth patterns. And maybe there's a point where we reach sustainability, and we somehow recognize that.
So you're saying, like, in the prior plans, growth area 1, the town center where everything radiated out from, you're saying we've kind of hit max
Or-
density.
Or maybe we should examine that area and see where there's room for more density, and where maybe we've reached sustainability,
And I
where we
think,
have a good sustainable populace.
I think we do that with recommended action 1, right? Periodically revisit the bylaw to ensure that they encourage and facilitate the pattern and type of development envisioned.
To that point, the theme of having the village center having the most density and then growth area 2 being the next dense, I guess on a per square mile area, that's true. But in just hearing you say that, that was one of the visions that popped into my head is, where are we going from here? Are we going to start building apartment buildings in the village because that's what's going to maintain that density? I don't think that that's on anybody's mind, but it seems like the growth area 2 is starting to get a lot of development, whereas village center is not necessarily growing as much due to it being fairly full as it is.
Okay.
Yeah. So it sounds like we don't really have consensus on goals, objectives? Do we want to take recommended actions out? Is everybody thinking along the lines? Do you want to keep thinking about it? Remember, part of the exercise was we felt streamlining the document would be a good thing for most residents. So we have to be very intentional about editing and taking out content that might live elsewhere. As much as you may love a particular recommended action.
You may have to negotiate to make it one of 3 rather than one
Yes.
of 10 or 12, and then the
So
rest of
that's,
them
I
will be in
don't,
another
we don't
document.
need to do that right now as far as cherry picking each one, but I think it would be helpful for us to say, yes, in the spirit of trying to edit this document, we agree that recommended actions can live offline, and if there's a really, really lovely recommended action that we have to keep, maybe we can just reposition it as an objective if needed. That is my suggestion, is we should,
I would certainly back that. You're talking about just reducing the number of recommended actions to,
I'm
say, 3.
saying recommended actions might be part of a planning commission work plan. They might be part of a different document that lives outside of the town plan itself.
Or maybe even as it's adopted as part of the plan, but just doesn't fill the pages between the introduction and the last thing that you say. It's an appendix.
Right. Could always be an addendum to the town plan if people want to see, okay, here's what the planning commission is going to focus on tactically.
And that would be the thing, is where to put that additional information, because to get back to the point of simplifying and having a more succinct plan, our plan becomes almost more of a reference document. It's not something that you sit down and read through to get the idea of where things are going. It's if you're looking for something specific, or if you have a bylaw and you need to create that, the report for the state that says, here's how it is backed up by our plan.
Right.
It's providing reference for that, really is what it is. So, and I think that's where this discussion originally started, where, what did we want our town plan to look like? If we go into this, just saying that we're looking to reduce the volume a little bit, but not necessarily overhaul the whole thing, which seems like the path that we're going down, then I'd be for putting recommended actions in an appendix or something, just to make the document more manageable. And then where some of these objectives don't make sense anymore, we just remove them or consolidate or try to shrink it.
Okay. I do think that's the path we are going down, just to reconfirm, if anybody has strong objections to working in that fashion, we should discuss it, because we have to get moving.
I think
And
it's a good idea.
if people are going to object midway through it, that will derail things.
Is that a speak now or forever hold your peace?
It's a, let's make sure we have general alignment on it. If not, then let's have a conversation about what's another way to do it. I think we've struggled with starting from the bottom up. It's a pretty heavy lifting task that I don't think any of us are really up for, nor do I necessarily think we need to reinvent the entire document.
So should we just go through this document, highlight what we think might be
I
extraneous?
think what we should do, yeah, this is sort of the model that we're recommending we take as we get into the tactical work. You know, there will be specific call-outs that are, you know, both substantive as well as, you know, could be format related, right? Like, is this something that should live elsewhere? Calling out, you know, things that have been completed that we may not all be aware of. something where it just helps us condense things and move, and, or a new issue could be highlighted, for example, that have we thought about X, Y, and Z as part of one of our objectives? Could be a new state law, could be something else, you know, within the community that we should layer in. So that's sort of, I don't know if we need to go through this entire document tonight, since the page turn probably won't be as productive as we want it to be, but I want to make sure everybody is in favor of this general approach with annotations and working through it in that manner as we go section by section.
On that, this is very approachable. I like what you did with the
Okay.
adding in comments and context.
And since you have the entire documents in paper form now, if you look ahead and there's something that really strikes you, let me know, and I can get it
Yeah,
in the
and I
annotation as
think
well.
The other thing that will be helpful is, you know, when you have your pre-read to come in and what do we want to delete, right? I know I keep going back to this, but it is important so we're not spending time with seven different opinions in real time thinking about, well, I don't know if we need the fourth objective. If you come in with X's or question marks, do we really need this? Something that helps us accelerate some of the walkthrough, that will be helpful.
Yes.
And it's still the same concept of doing a section by section?
Same concept of doing it section by section. I think what I think, and again, everybody should weigh in if you don't like this approach, but I think the most effective and efficient approach might be to assign responsibility to a commissioner for a specific section. So Dick will take housing, for example. Jamie will take energy. Kate will take a separate section, right? Sort of thinking that it seemed to work well on our DRB zoning list process where everybody did some homework and sort of led the conversation on behalf of the group and walked through what we were trying to accomplish that night, being the, you know, subject matter expert, so to speak, not a real expert on it, but as much as we can be as lay planning commissioners here. I think it's a good approach. It helps give direction and helps give everybody an opportunity to take a leadership role in the commission and just.
And there are other places that people may go. I mean, if you're doing natural resources, there's the Natural Resources Committee or.
A lot, yeah, I agree.
You know, there are places to
A lot of it
consult.
will be, you know, joint endeavors, right? Like, I definitely envision us having many conversations with the housing subcommittee when we get into the housing section.
Right.
Historic resources. Everybody like that approach? We don't have to necessarily assign sections tonight, but it would be helpful to get an indication of, are there preferences for certain sections?
You can start, yeah, you'll get a head start.
Yeah, you'll,
I can tackle land use.
Kate wants land use.
Is that page 24?
Page. Anybody? You don't have to decide now, but if you do have an inclination or an interest in a certain area,
You're going to do energy?
I'm happy to do
Yeah,
any.
energy is kind of a weird one because I wanted to say that we're getting this assistance from the Regional Planning Commission. The 8th of June, they will have some material for the commission to look at. So, anyway, that's just.
Is this the entire list of sections?
This is the table of contents for all of Volume 1, yeah, right here.
Okay.
And certain things are combined. So people would say, well, where's economic development? Well, economic development is part of growth and development.
Subsection.
So,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, if I had to pick one, the one that jumped at me was energy, but at this point, it doesn't matter, just assign me something. I don't think I'm an authority on,
Yeah, I don't think any.
And actually, I'm gonna try to bend your ears a little bit about energy before you leave tonight, just because, like I
Okay.
said, the RPC is working, but they'll have material, but before they send it,
Yeah.
they want a little feedback.
So again, just reach out to me, reach out to Dean as you think more about it, as you start to figure out, I think I'm interested in this section, definitely let us know so that we can accommodate interest and assignments.
I'd be interested in the growth and development section.
Okay,
Or the childcare section, but
good. We'll
Taken two.
put your names next to those. It's not, we'll sketch it out since Andrew's not here, Don's not here. We definitely want to
yeah, but
share the load, but those are good to know that you'll take the lead on those.
Dick?
Dick, any thoughts
You
on?
just beat me to it.
But you can both say, I like this, and then
Yeah, I like
growth is
I like growth and development, and I
Yeah.
also like natural scenic resources, land conservation.
okay. Okay. I don't know if I can do any more on telecom. But
You should be able to do it without looking at anything.
okay. I'm happy to plug in on any of these. I do want to give Andrew and Don a chance to weigh in, so I'll step in on whatever the group needs me to do. Why don't we take 5 minutes on the vision update so that we can get initial reactions, and I know it's 9:15, so I don't want to keep everybody here that late. Dean had included a markup, the 250 years and counting. I guess there are multiple versions of this, so there's one fold 11 by 17 here. And Dean, remind us what we were trying to do here. There's,
Well, there had been, there had been a fair amount of discussion, and what you're trying to do is really ultimately decide how much of the current vision do you want to change. So the current vision is up on the projector right now. There had been some interest when I had shared the vision from this is really pixelated. When I had shared the vision from the 2012 and before text, and the 2012 text has a long list of bulleted points that clarify things still further, but it also has a different kind of bent than the old, or rather than the current version. And so included in your packets was I just need to find the right file. But it's one where I essentially took one or two sentences that should be in a red line version, and I think I may have left over. So, yeah, there is a page where the words, "The town will feature a compact and prominent village center, first surrounded by residential." So this is somewhat consistent with that phrase that is in the land use section that we just read. And that is inspired by the old version, pre-2012. And so I felt somewhat comfortable putting it as the second half of the now very short first paragraph, because right now the first paragraph in the vision statement is just one sentence long. And I thought that if people were responding positively to aspects of the pre-2012 version, that you would incorporate or would consider incorporating that.
There is more language in the pre-2012 version that's in the second paragraph that I wasn't quite sure there would be consensus to add. That's the paragraph that's in the box that has to do with accommodating development at a pace. I wasn't sure that you wanted to go there, but I wouldn't be shocked if you decided that you did. I just didn't propose it. So essentially, my thoughts boil down to expanding the current vision as it's written by the addition of that sentence that comes from the pre-2012 version. But that was just to get the ball rolling. And Kate, you seem to have responded favorably to the 2012, so you may have a lot more to say than I did about.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like maybe just a easy way to do it would be to just take the following represent in no particular order, blah, 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 all the bullet things out. And we can kind of, you know, and then just go to in sum. I mean, that might be just like.
Okay, so, okay.
And then, you know, these can get, some of these are nice pithy statements that could be substituted in the land use section for some really long-winded things right now that sort of state the same thing over and over. So I would plan to reuse them, but just not have them here. I mean, I think if we can make this thing like, you know, 50 pages shorter or something, that would be fantastic. Just keep the
Yeah,
same
it's hard.
format, you know, and then leave it to somebody else to, hopefully not me in 8 years.
8 years, oh boy. So,
Yeah, get a life, right?
what do you think of this historically paragraph? Is that one you're saying we should reevaluate? Kate, if you're saying, why don't we take the approach of 2012?
I was gonna just like get rid of this.
Yeah.
And then what, and some.
I know Anne was in favor of
What was the one that
this
she
other
liked?
paragraph on the moderate tax rate and
Oh,
measured development. She no
okay.
longer has a vote, so, but I'd say that because I think it was a good call-out that,
yeah, I think that appeals to a number of people in this
Agree.
town, and I don't have a problem with that. I mean, we're going to develop responsibly. One of the reasons we have the growth areas, you know, to provide infrastructure at a, you know, there's a stated policy on how and when public infrastructure is provided. And, you know, all those things go into maintaining a moderate tax rate. I mean, we were investing in the form-based code as a way to sort of jumpstart the commercial corridor. I mean, you know, we like to talk about money in this town and how we can have more of it and lower taxes, so I think that makes some sense.
I think one of the comments from that conversation was relative to what, I mean, I understand the intent of it, but to say a moderate tax rate,
Yeah.
Vermont has a pretty high tax
Yeah.
rate. So,
But in comparison to
Right.
New York City.
right, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, but this, you know, the select board, I think, at least this select board takes a great deal of pride in, you know, really keeping things to, we have you know, what, 15% or something of our budget is ours. I mean, so much goes to pay for the schools, but I think there's a source of pride in keeping that as low as possible. I think we are one of the oldest towns in terms of the numbers of retired people who live in our, you know, or in other words, people who are more on fixed incomes. So that's something that has always been important. The select board makes everybody, you know, get matching funds, or, you know, that they're pretty fiscally conservative, so. I think they will look favorably on mentions. but if there's a way to make it pithier,
I mean,
I think
the
that
in
makes
some
sense.
paragraph, I find to be pretty helpful. On the bottom of the, I guess, older one, there's not a whole lot of objectionable words in that. I mean, it sums up. That's why in some,
Yeah, I like it too.
right? There's nothing objectionable in it.
No, it's aspirational, it's,
what's what we thought, and
Consistent
then the
with
select
what-
board chucked it
Yeah.
out, but,
well, hey,
Let's throw it in again.
Bring it
Exactly.
back.
this is why we're doing the good work of the town.
Where are you guys?
Well,
In
The-
some, it's,
yeah,
So you're getting rid of the bullets,
well, yeah,
not necessarily.
I think we're sketching out some ideas here. I don't know if we're going to coalesce around anything necessarily, and I don't think we need to this evening. I like this idea of the vision statement may evolve as we start to get into some of the work, but it's helpful for us to,
What are you working off of?
we're,
Yeah, I mean, to me, that
This
is,
one.
That's like the vision
that's
statement.
it, yeah.
Okay, just making sure I have it.
When we were talking previously about what a vision statement should look like, is it a short statement, is it
Right.
multiple paragraphs, that sort of thing? I mean, the in sum, that is a vision statement to me. The rest of this
Let's
stuff
pull it in,
is all good,
right?
but
Yeah. And does anyone feel strongly like we need to stamp a vision statement on day one of
Oh, and
starting this, or
it
do
can
people
certainly be a
feel
work
like
in progress,
they
but
like to see it evolve and we're gonna get reactions to this, and I think we should continue to keep it in front of us, especially early on as we get into the first few sections.
I would just suggest maybe keeping that in our minds, that having a short vision statement would go a long way towards setting the tone of reducing volume.
Right. I like that idea too.
Yeah.
So can we,
how about if,
Can
can
we
this
put
be
that at
sort
the
of like
top?
a working vision statement, for now, and it's not, the final thing, but.
could we move, I guess what I like is, let's have a one-pager. People seem to like this
that
in some paragraph, but delete in some. Can we just start Shelburne, Vermont at the top? And let's put that at the top, right? That's our lead-in. And then we'll keep these other paragraphs, we'll add these two, and then I think the next go-around we'll be able to say, you know what, we can cut this. Maybe we don't all love the idea of referencing a moderate tax rate. Interested to hear from the other commissioners on the vision as well, since we only have 5 of us here. That's in this piece here. He pulled some of this in, but this paragraph was not reflected in the red line, so I think we should pull that in as well. And I know we're making the statement longer, but I think we're gonna make it longer to then make it shorter, once we have it all on one page.
So you're saying this is number 1, and then.
I'm saying, yep, this is 1, and then we'll keep this, right?
Which is this one?
This is 2, as revised, right? We pulled in that. 3 will be the accommodating text. And then we'll keep historically for the time being, just so we can ruminate on it and figure out if we want to cut it out. It's okay?
I can work with that.
We're getting into. The last piece on the comprehensive plan here was a quick update on history and energy from Dean.
Yes, and I'm just going to try to get my act together. So, the questions that But just to recap for new folks, the language that the town plan has regarding energy matters because if we have the right language and material in the plan will be elevated essentially so that it has more impact in the Section 248 process. And we are lucky in that we're one of 3 towns in Chittenden County that are getting some additional assistance from the Regional Planning Commission in meeting the requirements that are in place, because we don't get to just put whatever language we want in our plan and qualify. We have to put in language that meets a law and some guidelines developed by the Department of Public Service. There has been a lot of work done by the Regional Planning Commission that's pretty technical in nature. It includes some maps showing where in Shelburne there's potential for solar sites and for wind generation sites and things like that. But as part of the qualifying for this elevated status, we have to, in our plan, have language that shows that we're acting consistently with other state goals. And this is just something that happens in this whole realm, is there are state goals, and those goals are supposed to be reflected, or we work consistent with those state goals in our local plan. With that as kind of an entry, the questions that I have is part of the maps. Some of you who were around know this. We've talked about preferred locations or locations that we don't want to see things, and we added to the list that is shown on the maps the 100-foot buffer for Lake Champlain, and so that's considered a possible constraint. Scenic view sheds, possible constraint. Significant view areas, possible constraints. So one of the questions that comes up, the Regional Planning Commission would like to know, is do we have any preferred locations? You know, a long time ago, Kate and I and a professor from UVM was supposed to be helping with telecom siting location, but I think the idea has also spilled over in terms of energy siting. But are there any sites in Shelburne right now, or that with a little bit of effort, the commission thinks it could identify as like, that's the perfect site? Now, maybe 5 years ago, we would all be saying, oh, I imagine there would be a perfect site on Shelburne Farms, where they happen to have a site now. Or that there's this great location in the middle of Meach Cove Trust where there's happens to be a site. Are there any other places that people have in mind as sites for renewable energy facilities that you can think of? There's no wrong answer to the question. It may be that there isn't. But that's one of the questions. Has Shelburne identified any sites that would be preferred location where solar or wind project?
About Route 7 roofs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, to
Yeah.
incorporate it into the form-based
Yeah.
code.
And roofs are somewhat
Solar farm there.
yeah, and I think that's important, rooftops, but it's not necessarily the kind of like singular location that I think they would have in mind. If you said, you know, if there was on the top of Teddy Bear or something like that as a roof location, I think they're looking for individual sites.
Is that a requirement of
How about the
Act
school?
174? They're asking us to?
Well, are there,
Or is it one of the factors?
one of
that
the
is in
things that the Planning Commission, the Regional Planning Commission has in terms of the information that they are assembling, if we are able to say that we have preferred locations for renewable energy facilities, then that would be furthering one of the goals. It isn't necessarily an explicit requirement. Our plan must identify those locations, but it would be proof of furthering the goals.
Got it.
So if there are no spots that are known, then
There might be, we just haven't had an opportunity to
Yeah.
discuss it as a group, really.
so
During that exercise, it was very much about
the constraint.
constraints.
Yeah.
Right, that's what we were instructed to do, so.
Yep. And this is a twist. It's a new thing, and I
Yeah.
think they might have in mind that towns might have less renewable energy activity than we do, and that because there is not a lot, people would be there'd be a consensus about where the logical the spot is. But like I say, I think we already have some
installations in those kinds of places, like Shelburne Farms. It's a large property, and this is in the middle, and people, it's not gonna be visible. And similarly with Beach Cove.
Yeah, I agree. I think our number is pretty high
Our
relative
number
to
is
other
quite,
towns, right?
and I'll get to one aspect of that in a little bit. So if Jason is taking the lead, then this is one of those things that we would be, you know, if we can give them an answer, yeah, here's a spot. So relating to the state energy goals, one of the goals, it's in 174 or in 24 VSA 4352, is to obtain 90% of all energy across all sectors from renewable sources by 2050, with an interim goal of 25% renewable by 2025. That's a pretty steep goal, but that's one of them that's in their memo. Reducing total energy, so there is a where the energy comes from aspect of the goal, or of the goals and what the plan might address. Then there's the total amount of energy consumption goal. So we want energy from renewables as much as possible is one idea. We want to reduce energy consumption substantially is another idea, and that goal is 1/3 by 2050. So if you think about it right now, with the growth that we will see and the evolution in the community that we would see by 2050, the idea is that we would still be reducing total energy consumption by 1/3. So that's adding a lot of efficiency.
Yeah.
Can we prioritize that in our town plan, efficiency over, you
New
know,
facilities.
solar
Yeah.
facilities? Is that
Well,
an option?
the solar facility, I think we have to cover both sides. I
Yeah,
think we have to
yeah.
look at the consumption side and the
So
production
they're
side.
both goals.
But can we say, we're really going to champion efficiency? Is it
Well,
possible?
efficiency could be our, and I'll touch on that in just a second. We could say that we find that it'll be better to focus on efficiency of transportation energy sources over weatherization of homes. So we may say transportation is going to be a better place for us to put our resources than in heating. So that is a place where we do have some levers that we can mess with, but the goals overall by the amount are so substantial that I don't know that we'll be able to leave any stones unturned the way that this is going to end up. So anyway, this is another goal, just react, and weatherizing 25% of homes by 2020. That is another part of the memo that they sent. Electric vehicles. One of the goals that's included in this memo that I received from them is increasing electric vehicles from 1% of the fleet to 89% of the fleet by 2050. I mean, can you wrap your head around that? 6% by 2025.
I think we should really look at the Route 7 corridor as a place for solar installations. I mean, even some of the properties before they develop could have an array. I mean, it's one of the reasons I would prefer to see arrays rather than wind towers, because arrays can easily get ripped out and something else
Yeah.
done with them, that land.
So, and I will work with Jason and pass along the memo and the clarification, but the issue is really that's the kind of feedback that the Regional Planning Commission is going to be looking for, either to help craft for us, or they'll be saying for the plan to be likely to get the kind of approval that it needs, it's going to need to talk.
We should look at Bennington. There are a couple plans that have already been
By their
okayed
by the
by their own
RPCs,
RPCs
as opposed to the.
that have the energy component already blessed.
Yeah,
So,
I asked them about a model, and they said they don't, and they were prepared to do a couple of things. One, which was to mark up the existing text, and then suggest things that would go in.
yeah, I mean, that's what I was looking at. I was looking at this.
The quandary that we might find ourselves in, because we already have so much solar installation, we are already way ahead of the alternative generation goal. So that's not where we have our problem. The problem is going to be on the consumption and conservation side.
Oh, well, then transportation is the key.
Yeah.
Those bike paths.
And that's where the, you know, my comment about the electric vehicles in the fleet,
And EV
if,
filling
you know, but
stations
can
on Route
we,
7.
can we wrap our minds around the idea of 89% by 2050?
I guess we have to for the time being, so
Yeah.
it's a target. It's
Result in some bylaw changes. Yeah.
So I
it's a
will
ways
leave
away,
that.
but yeah, no, I think
Now
that's
that we have a
helpful.
person who's
Yeah.
tagged to it.
I'll take it.
Anything on housing or?
I did not have a chance to connect with Ron about that. I had intended to, but something that I wanted to mention is, and I have mentioned this once before, but it's important to remind people, there are new regional housing and population and employment projections that have been adopted for the Regional Planning Commission. And so, the level of growth that's contemplated for Shelburne under those ranges from, on the population side, a growth from 7,100 in 2010 to 9,050 in 2050. So the total population growth over the 40-year period that's included in these official regional projections is, in my view, it might seem like a big number to some, but I don't see it as a huge number, slightly less than 2,000 over 40 years.
Yeah, year-over-year percentage, that's like nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, right, well, it's, they break it out, actually, they've got a 1.67%, actually for the years behind us, 0.74 or 0.57, and then it drifts down to 20.21 and picks back up a little bit towards 2050, but,
Yeah.
you know,
Could you send those around?
I will send
to the
these
group?
out.
It'd be interesting to see.
That's awesome.
And then
Insane.
employment, the figures are, just for reference, I may have grabbed the wrong, sorry. Current projected employment in 2010, 4,200, and in 2050, 6,200. And some of these numbers are gonna, you know, possibly inform conversations about growth
Right.
and people working on the economic development piece. Like you say, these are really small numbers for some, you know, for some people. The way that this has been approached, though, is that there are some official state projections, and those are what's driving the regional projections. There's only so much of the state total. The Chittenden County is getting a big portion of the state's total, but the state total is not as dramatic as it might otherwise be. So that's
Yeah.
one of the constraints.
Dean, is there any discussion at the state level of, you know, I just wonder about all these climate change refugees, you know? I mean, 2050, a lot of Florida is going to be underwater.
Yeah,
Louisiana, I mean, you know, where are these people going to go?
well, that's an interesting conversation
house.
people to have, but they're not,
Pruitt's house.
it's not built into, it's not built into, how do you model that? You can't. It's,
Yeah.
People are coming in now. I'm working with more out-of-staters than I am in-staters, all the time.
So,
And they don't think our taxes are that bad.
next item here is commissioner question and comments.
Are they all from New York?
Any comments, questions? Given the hour, we'll move on to other business. Anything else, Dean? Correspondence?
unless people are really anxious to go back, I have basically edited the zoning change report in the way that I would. So if people are curious what that looks like, I've done it pretty much, and it will shorten it by a third.
Sounds good. Consider a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Moved by Jason, seconded by Kate. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.